imagining what's going through their minds. This is my last meal on this earth.
For centuries, the public has harbored a strange, morbid fascination with the final meals of those on death row. Food carries deep spiritual and emotional meaning for the living, for most of us, but it also holds significance for the condemned. Do we have a morbid obsession with these last meals? And what does that say about our society? One thing is certain, a person's final meal choice reveals a great deal about them, their background, values, and even the life that they once lived. Food is more than sustenance. It brings people together. Families gather around their dinner table, sharing stories and memories. Traditions are built around meals. Holidays, celebrations, and cultural heritage are all tied to what we eat. Food is community, and that doesn't exclude those staring down death's door. For the condemned, food can serve as a final comfort, a moment of familiarity before taking their final last breath. Public curiosity about these meals has only intensified over time. Of the 27 states that currently uphold capital punishment, 3, Arizona, California, and Texas, publicly document prisoners' final meal requests on their websites. This level of transparency turns an intimate, personal moment into a public spectacle. But why? Because in a strange way, these meals humanize those who are otherwise seen only through the lens of their crimes. As people, we all have favorite foods, meals tied to childhood, family, or comfort. Whether it's something as simple as a cheeseburger or as extravagant as lobster, food carries memories. Maybe that's why we're drawn to these final meal requests. They remind us of ourselves. In those last bites, we see something or someone familiar. Not all states grant inmates full freedom in their final meal selections. Many impose restrictions, while some have abolished the tradition altogether. But Georgia is actually different. And that's exactly what this episode is about. We'll examine the final meals of several Georgia death row inmates and explore our culture's morbid fascination with them. We'll also discuss certain foods that inmates are prohibited from having as their final meal. As these individuals face death, maybe their last meal is one small comfort to hold on to. A brief moment of solace before the inevitable. And maybe that's the true purpose of a final meal. To make us see the humanity in the condemned, which raises a question. What would your final meal be? As the clock ticks down, what food would you choose to carry you into the afterlife? Because one thing is certain, when your fate is sealed, there's no turning back. The gavel has fallen. This is Final Judgment. I'm Nichole Mondshein, and this is Final Judgment, a deep dive into the final days, last choices, and chilling moments before execution on Georgia's death row. Some convictions unravel, while some sentences are overturned. The evidence has been laid bare, the jury has spoken. But was justice truly served? For some, there's no appeal, no second chances, just the final judgment. But for others, the final judgment isn't so final after all. The state of Georgia has practiced the tradition of granting inmates one final special meal for decades. The origins of this ritual can be traced back to pre-Christian times, literally over 2,000 years ago, when it was believed that feeding the condemned would ease their transition into the afterlife. According to Linda R. Myers, The Meaning of Death, Last Words, Last Meals, the practice of offering a final meal dates back centuries. The Aztecs, Hurons, Romans, and Greeks all had some form of last meal tradition, whether given to human sacrifices, prisoners, or those on their deathbeds. While the exact origins of the tradition remain unclear, historical records suggest that similar rituals have existed for as long as human history itself. Various cultures have participated in their own versions of this practice. In France, the condemned were given a glass of rum. In 16th century England, inmates shared a meal with their executioner. But the version of the last meal we recognize today, especially here in the US, seems to mirror something even deeper, a cultural and religious ties to Christ and the Last Supper. As Linda R. Meyer explains in her book, there's tradition reflects America's complicated relationship with capital punishment. It's a ritual that, in some ways, acts as a final reconciliation for the condemned, a symbolic offering of unity, forgiveness, and even salvation through execution as a form of blood sacrifice. Like the death penalty itself, the tradition of the last meal has evolved across different cultures. Some societies have even held grand feasts for the condemned, viewing it as a form of communal atonement. Today, most states that uphold capital punishment, including Georgia, allow inmates to request a special meal a day or two before their scheduled execution. However, Georgia stands out for its relatively lenient approach to these requests. Unlike other states that impose spending limits or strict menu restrictions, Georgia allows death row inmates a final meal of their choosing, so long as it can be prepared in the prison kitchen or sourced from a nearby grocery store or restaurant near the Georgia Diagnostic and Classification Prison in Butts County, where the state's death row is located. It has to be something within reason, Fred Head said, who was the former warden of the Jackson prison. We certainly do want to honor the inmate's request since it's his last meal. Perhaps it's Southern hospitality or simply the state's deep-rooted love of food. But Georgia has far fewer limitations on final meal requests than other death penalty states. Unlike Oklahoma, which caps final meal cost at $20 to $25, or Florida, which allows up to $40, Georgia places no financial limit. Some inmates request simple fast food or comfort meals costing just a few bucks, while others have ordered elaborate feasts. One prisoner even requested an 11-course meal, which we'll expand on here in just a little bit. Texas, however, has completely abolished the tradition. Before 2011, the state allowed inmates to request their final meals, but that changed due to one particularly controversial case, Lawrence Russell Brewer. Lawrence, a self-proclaimed white supremacist, was convicted in the 1998 racially motivated murder of James Byrd Jr., a 49-year-old black man in Jasper County, Texas. While on death row, Brewer requested an enormous meal: chicken fried steaks, a triple meat bacon cheeseburger, a pound of barbecue, fajitas, a meat lover's pizza, ice cream, and peanut butter fudge. But then refused to eat any of it, claiming he simply wasn't hungry. This outraged Texas lawmakers, so they ended up ending the practice, declaring that condemned prisoners would receive whatever was on that standard prison menu, particularly just for that day. Before eliminating final meal requests, Texas prison officials were overwhelmed with media inquiries about inmates' last meals. So, to manage public curiosity, they created an entire website listing each request. "We're not trying to entertain anyone by putting this information out," Michelle Lyons of the Texas Department of Criminal Justice said. "We're putting it out because it's what the public wants to know." Despite Georgia's more flexible approach, certain restrictions still apply. While states set their own rules for final meal requests, some prohibitions are nearly universal. Alcohol and tobacco are almost always denied. Some inmates also have asked to share their last meal with others or have their meal distributed among fellow prisoners, but such requests are also typically refused. Policies also vary in how food is sourced. In California, inmates are allowed to order restaurant takeout with a spending limit of about $50. Similarly, Oklahoma permits orders from local fast food chains, with Pizza Hut, Wendy's, and Long John Silver's being among the most frequently requested. Georgia, however, has remained known for its open approach, allowing a broad range of requests. Many inmates on Georgia's death row have opted for classic American comfort food or Southern staples. For instance, Willie James Pye, the most recent person executed in Georgia, requested 2 chicken sandwiches, 2 cheeseburgers, french fries, 2 bags of plain potato chips, and 2 lemon lime sodas. Daniel Anthony Lucas, executed in April 2016, chose a meat pizza, steak, and a cheese calzone, stuffed portobello mushroom, a chef's salad with ranch and honey mustard dressing, and orange juice. These meals, though consumed in isolation, remain a final act of choice for those who have otherwise lost all control over their fate. One of the most extravagant last meal requests in Georgia's history belonged to Ray Jefferson Cromartie. Ray was executed by lethal injection at the Georgia Diagnostic and Classification Prison for the 1994 murder of a convenience store clerk in Thomasville, Georgia. Just days before the murder, he had also shot and severely wounded another store clerk during a separate robbery attempt. But despite consistently claiming that he never pulled the trigger in either case, Ray was found guilty of murder and given the death penalty. Trial evidence revealed that Ray had borrowed a handgun from his cousin before entering the particular convenience store, Madison Street Deli, where he shot the first clerk in the face, seriously injuring him. However, the wounded clerk was unable to positively identify his attacker, and surveillance footage was too blurry to confirm who actually fired the gun. Then, days later, Ray allegedly asked a friend to drive him to another gas station, the Junior Food Store in Thomasville, so he could steal beer. But in the course of the robbery, he reportedly shot the store clerk, Richard Slies, twice in the head before fleeing without taking any money. Throughout his trial, Ray would constantly plead his innocence, but witnesses would testify and say Ray was in fact the gunman in both shootings. He was then found guilty on several felony counts, including aggravated battery, armed robbery, and murder. His defense team fought for post-conviction DNA testing, arguing that they could prove that Ray wasn't the shooter, but both a judge and the Georgia Supreme Court rejected this request, stating that his attorneys had waited way too long and failed to demonstrate that the testing would change the outcome of his case. The U.S. Supreme Court ultimately denied his final appeal, and after nearly 3 decades on death row, Ray's execution was scheduled for October 30th, 2019. Now, Ray's victim, his daughter, Elizabeth, even supported her father's killer's request for DNA testing because, according to her, she didn't want someone who didn't kill her father to pay the ultimate price. But she did say that officials had refused to listen to her or what she wanted or what she thought her dad would have wanted. My father's death was senseless. Executing another man would also be senseless, especially if he may not have shot my father, Elizabeth said. And right before his execution, an eyewitness to the crime came forward testifying that they didn't think that Ray was in fact the shooter. Now, like most violent offenders, Ray had a violent upbringing. His mother raised him as a single parent for most of his life, but he would soon run away from home as a young teenager after his mother brought in a series of violent stepfathers in and out of their home. He would then constantly drift from city to city in different states before actually ending up right here in Georgia. He had also suffered from fetal alcohol syndrome because his mother drank during her pregnancy with him, causing brain damage and a diminished ability to reason, according to his attorneys. His execution was later postponed to November 13th, 2019 due to a procedural issue, and with that extra time, Ray was given the rare opportunity to change his final meal request, something that most inmates never get the chance to do. And he definitely made sure to take full advantage of that opportunity, turning in an already indulgent request into an all-out feast. Originally, Ray requested a meal of steak, lobster, macaroni and cheese, cube steak, rice and gravy, a steak and cheese sandwich, a double cheeseburger, fries, ranch dressing, a strawberry milkshake, and a layered cake with white icing. Oh yeah, he went out. But when his date was pushed back, he revised his request into a massive 11-item spread. Steak, lobster, macaroni and cheese, a chicken sandwich, cube steak, rice and gravy, a chicken Caesar salad with ranch dressing, a double cheeseburger, fries, red beans, a strawberry milkshake, a layered cake with white icing, and apple juice to top it all off. It sounds like a literal feast made for a king. While many US states impose spending limits on final meal requests, Georgia has long been more lenient. Even so, Ray's extravagant selection stands out as one of the most over-the-top last meals ever recorded. The night before Ray's scheduled execution, Elizabeth, the daughter of his victim, made this final plea to help stop a man from facing death who may not have been her father's killer. I am saddened beyond words that the state of Georgia appears to be willing to execute Ray Jefferson Cromartie tomorrow night without first doing everything in its power to answer the unresolved questions about what truly happened on the day my father, Richard Slies, was murdered in 1994. Over the past year and a half, I have read a lot about the case and learned many things that I previously had not known. I believe that there are serious questions about about whether Ray Cromartie actually killed my dad. I wrote to the district attorney in the case, the Attorney General's office, and the Supreme Court of Georgia to urge them to order DNA testing of the evidence that would help answer some of these questions. I went before the Georgia Board of Pardons and Paroles and asked for their help. I told them all that I thought it would be very, very wrong to execute Mr. Cromartie without conducting this testing. I never received any reply or even acknowledgement that the Attorney General and district attorneys received my letters. The technology is available and is not burdensome to conduct it. Some people have said that even if the DNA evidence were to come out in Mr. Cromartie's favor, it would not prove that he did not murder my father. First, that makes no sense to me. The trial court still has the clothing that the shooter wore in the first incident and has never tested it for DNA. And for both incidents, knowing who loaded the gun by testing the shells would actually say a lot. But second, to me, even if the testing wouldn't be 100% conclusive, I want to know, as the victim in this case, what the testing would show, regardless of what it would or would not prove under the law. Answering those questions is tremendously important to me. And late last week, I learned that Mr. Cromartie's co-defendant in the case signed a sworn statement saying that another man, Corey Clark, actually killed my dad. I have been told that under Georgia law, this can still be a capital crime. But I also understand that at the trial, the prosecutor argued that Mr. Cromartie is the one who murdered my father, and for that, he should die. If the jurors had known that Mr. Cromartie, in fact, had not pulled the trigger that night, I believe that they would not have sentenced him to death. I understand that I have certain rights as a victim under both the Georgia Constitution and statutes, most notably the right to be treated with fairness, dignity, and respect, and the right to be heard at any proceedings involving the sentencing of the accused. In the course of the past few months, I have not been treated with fairness, dignity, or respect, and people in power have refused to listen to what I had to say. I believe this was, in part, because I was not saying what I was expected to say as a victim. This leads me to the conclusion that victims' rights extend only to those who support what the state apparently wants most in death penalty cases, the execution of the offender or alleged offender. In the end, this is not what I want. It took me a long time to get past the point of hating the person who murdered my father. But I found that over time, what I really wanted was answers and a more complete understanding of what had happened and why. That was what became most important to me in my long journey toward healing. To do that, I had to have contact with Mr. Cromartie's lawyers and those working with them because they alone had those answers. The prosecution had their theory, but they did not have access to Mr. Cromartie, and they were unwilling to test their theory with the technology now available to shed light on what really happened on April 10th, 1994. It was shocking and surprising to me that Mr. Cromartie and his defense team were there for me when the state was not. I am very grateful to all of them for their willingness to engage with me and to answer the tough questions that I had. That was the most critical part of my personal process, and after many years of deliberation and struggle, it helped me conclude that forgiving Mr. Cromartie, whatever his role in my father's murder, was most important in restoring myself in the wake of this horrible crime. My hope is that other victims will be treated with the dignity and respect required by the state of Georgia, no matter their specific needs and their opinions about the legal issues. I forgave Mr. Cromartie and found that the heavy burden of bitterness and trauma evaporated. I urge Georgia officials to stop Ray Cromartie's execution and see that DNA testing is conducted immediately. But unfortunately, her final pleas went unanswered. Ray would still be awaiting his execution. On the gurney awaiting his death, Ray declined to say any final words, but did allow for a prayer to be recited on his behalf. Following his grand feast, Ray was executed at the age of 52 at the Georgia Diagnostic and Classification Prison in Jackson on November 13th, 2019, after spending over 20 years on death row. Ray became the 75th person executed in Georgia since the state reinstituted the death penalty back in 1976 and was the 52nd person executed in the state by lethal injection. With such a massive meal, one has to wonder if he even managed to finish it all before his execution. And if he did, perhaps he just simply slipped into a food coma, much like the drowsy aftermath of Thanksgiving dinner, before succumbing to the lethal injection. If nothing else, it was a strangely fitting way to go out. Unlike many other states that put a price cap on a death row inmate's final meal, Georgia does not. And while Ray's last meal was definitely extensive, lavish even, he wasn't the only one knocking on death's door in Georgia with an appetite. Kelly Renee Gissendanner, the only woman ever executed in Georgia by lethal injection, also went all out for her last meal. She ordered 2 cheeseburgers, 2 large order of french fries, lemonade, cherry vanilla ice cream, popcorn, cornbread, and a salad made of boiled eggs, tomatoes, bell peppers, onions, carrots, cheese, and buttermilk dressing. Kelly was sentenced to death in 1998 for orchestrating her husband's murder and was executed by lethal injection on September 30th, 2015. And she's not alone. Scotty Garnell Morrow's final meal included a hamburger with mayonnaise, 2 chicken and waffle meals, a pint of butter pecan ice cream, a bag of buttered popcorn, 2 all-beef franks, and a large lemonade. Scotty was convicted of fatally shooting his ex-girlfriend, Barbara Ann Young, and her friend, Tanya Woods, at a Gainesville home in December 1994. A third woman had survived the attack, and he was executed back in May of 2019. And then there's Robert Earl Butts Jr., executed by lethal injection in May 2018 for the 1996 armed robbery and murder of an off-duty correctional officer, Donovan Corey Parks. Believed to be a gang-related killing, it was brutal. And his last meal contained a bacon cheeseburger with American and cheddar cheese, a ribeye steak, 6 chicken tenders, seasoned french fries, cheesesteak, and a strawberry lemonade. Keith Tarp, sentenced to death in 1991 for murdering Jacqueline Freeman, went with 3 spicy chicken breasts, a roast beef sandwich with sauce, a fish sandwich, tater logs, onion rings, apple pie, and a vanilla milkshake. Unlike the others, Tharp wasn't executed though. He died in January 2020 at 61 years old, likely from complications related to cancer, while he was on and awaiting death row. Whether you see this as a final treat for the condemned or a small, strange act of kindness before they take their final breath, one thing is clear: Georgia's death row inmates don't shy away from a good meal or a feast. Maybe it's a last indulgence before crossing over. Maybe it's taking advantage of the system. Who knows? But Georgia definitely knows how to accommodate. Obviously, no meal can undo the crimes that landed these people on death row. But in a strange way, it almost feels like the state is sending them off with a blessing. One final act of humanity. One thing they won't accommodate though, as I already mentioned, is alcohol. Marcus Ray Johnson, executed in November 2015, requested a 6-pack of beer with his final meal. His request was ultimately denied. Alcohol is contraband, even in death. Instead, he had baked fish, cheese grits, dry mixed beans, coleslaw, cornbread, cookies, and fruit punch. And if an inmate doesn't make a special request, well, Georgia serves them with a standard prison menu: chicken and rice, rudabuscus, seasoned turnip greens, dry white beans, cornbread, bread pudding, and fruit punch. A meal, a last supper, and then nothing. But believe it or not everyone takes advantage of one final indulgence before they take their final breath. Troy Davis, executed in September 2011, declined a special last meal. Instead, he was offered the institution's standard tray: grilled cheeseburgers, oven browned potatoes, baked beans, coleslaw, cookies, and a great beverage. His case drew international attention. Convicted of killing off-duty police officer Mark McPhail in Savannah, Georgia in 1989, Troy Davis maintained his innocence to the very end. And even as he lay strapped to the gurney in his final moments, he lifted his head to address the slain officer's family, insisting he was not responsible for the murder, that he never even had a gun. Now, was this a desperate final plea to avoid death, or was he truly innocent? We may never know. But whatever the reason, guilt, shame, remorse, anxiety, he chose not to partake in Georgia's last meal tradition. And honestly, fair. Then there's 41-year-old Georgia death row inmate Joshua Bishop, executed in 2016. His final meal was much more modest than most on this list. He only requested a barbecue sandwich, potato chips, and a glass of lemonade. His legal counsel even took it upon herself to revise his request. According to reports, she looked at the form and told him, no, you want more, before adding coleslaw, a second sandwich, candy, and ice cream. She literally walked him through all these additions. She thought that he deserved them, that he deserved more than what he was requesting. Maybe this act of generosity meant more to the counselor than it did to Joshua himself. I think last meals are less important to prison culture than they are to the public. Erica Camplin, author of Prison Food in America, wrote, "As a society, while we continue to implement capital punishment, we at least perceive that we are giving these death row inmates a dignified finale." This simply begs the question, if you were knocking on death's door, would you be hungry enough to feast? Would you want to taste your favorite foods one last time? Or would the weight of the moment be too much to stomach? But why are people so fascinated with the condemned's final meal in the first place? Is it the public's way of feeling remorse, a way to convince ourselves that execution is somehow more humane than it truly is? Or is it just our morbid curiosity, our obsession with death and those who commit heinous crimes? It makes you wonder, who is the special last meal truly for? Yes, technically it's for the inmates whose time on this earth is running out. But is it actually more for the public, a way to comfort society as a human being is about to be killed? We all know that food is comforting. Maybe this tradition is meant to provide a type of solace, not just for the condemned, but for the rest of us as well. But then there's this question. Do these inmates deserve this final act of kindness at all? And why, as a culture, are we so fixated on last meals? Why are we so intrigued by what someone chooses to eat before they die? Sure, their choices can reveal pieces of their identity, where they grew up, their preferences, the way they lived their life. But in doing so, does it also humanize them? And at the same time, does it humanize the act of execution, turning death into something digestible under the guise of justice? Maybe these meals give us a glimpse inside their minds, making us see the condemned as people who, in some ways, might be more like us than we care to admit. Or perhaps it's just one final gesture of kindness, one last ritual before they take their final breath. Food is one of those few universal experiences. It carries culture, tradition, memories, even disgust. No matter your race, gender, economic status, or origin, food is something that connects all of us together. It's an identity, a necessity, and a reflection of who we are. So what do you think? What does food mean to you? And why do you think we, as humans, are so captivated by the final meals of the condemned? The final judgment has been made, but for these Georgia inmates, their legacies are far from over.